I just got off the airplane, so I look like I just got off the airplane and ran to my car because that's what I did. But sorry about being a half hour late, everyone, for this YouTube live streaming video. My flight is a little bit late, so I'm late starting the YouTube video. But today's video is about um, the RTA hold process and answering some of your questions. So let me pull up my notes, and if anybody has any chat questions they want to type in, go ahead, and I will do my best to go through the chat questions as well. So the number one question I expected people to ask is, what is RTA? Because some people might see this video and not know what an RTA hold is. An RTA is the acronym that the FDA uses for refusal to accept. Back in 2012, they implemented a refusal to accept process on the basis of receiving a lot of submissions from companies that were not of sufficiently high quality to be worth their time to even bother reviewing. And so the FDA's position was, we get so many submissions that are very low quality that it wastes our time, so we need a screening process up front to screen out the submissions that are low quality so we don't waste our time reviewing those, and we focus on the submissions that have adequate quality and content and format that we could actually get to substantial equivalence. So they implemented this checklist process. They trained a bunch of pre-screeners to pre-screen the submissions. Some of them were lead reviewers, some of them are people that are reviewers in training, some are people that will not be lead reviewers but have enough training that they could review the submissions for the format and content and quality. And initially, when they implemented this process, they had an extremely high fallout rate for the number of submissions that were rejected. So we were seeing 60, 70, 80% sometimes of the submissions were actually being rejected. And then over time, they became more consistent at the FDA, and it fell down to around 50% or less. Currently, under the COVID pandemic, we're actually seeing a slightly higher than 50% refusal rate. So these are submissions that they actually put on hold. So that's what the RTA hold process is. When you first submit your 510K, they have a pre-screener going through a checklist and saying, does this meet our requirements? And if it doesn't, then what you do is you get an email from the reviewer that reviewed your submission as a pre-screening, and the checklist is attached, and things are highlighted in yellow in the checklist, saying specifically with the reviewer's comments what they think is not adequate, according to their checklist and the guidance document on the RTA screening process. So that's what is an RTA hold. There were 4 things that I posed at the beginning of my article. So this is all posted as a blog in addition on our website. So if you go to medicaldeviceacademy.com and you type in RTA hold, this should be the first link that shows up, is this blog article on RTA hold, and we published that on Tuesday this week. And that specific blog, it had 4 things that were, did you know this? So test your knowledge on RTA holds. The first item was, did you know that 50% or more of the RTAs are being put on hold? So that in the scheme of things, we have over 3,000 submissions every year that are 510K submissions. And you know that because the last 4 digits of the number of a 510K are the sequential number of what was received. And every year we see over the last 4 digits always start with a 3. So we know we always have over 3,000 submissions in recent years. The next thing that you need to know is, how many times can you be put on hold for the RTA screening? And there was a short period of time where the unofficial policy was, we're not going to have reviewers put this on hold multiple times. That we'll have them put it on hold once. If the company responds, then we'll kick it over to the lead reviewer to do a substantive review, which is the next phase of the 510K review process. But we've actually seen multiple submissions in the history of our company and our clients that have had more than one RTA hold. The most I've ever seen is 3 RTA holds. I don't know if there's an upper limit. Officially, it doesn't say anywhere that there is an upper limit or you would only get this many. But it is possible to get them, and every single time you get an RTA, you could keep that on hold potentially for 180 days while you plan your response. So you could end up with a ridiculously long review cycle due to all the times you put it on RTA hold. But there really isn't any reason why you should be on RTA hold in the first place, because there are ways to avoid it completely. Number two, if you get help, it shouldn't even be taking you 180 days to address whatever the issues are. So there are only a couple things that would really be showstoppers, and that would be you don't have any biocompatibility testing and your device has patient contact. That would be something that's a problem, but even that can be done in 12 weeks for most types of devices. It's only implants that would require a lot longer testing cycles. And if you've got an implant and you didn't do any biocompatibility testing and submit it to the FDA, you really should be withdrawing your submission and maybe having a pre-sub with the FDA and discussing what is required for an implant, because you should have known you need that implant testing and biocompatibility testing for an implant product. The fourth question that I had on there to test your knowledge is, the third test of knowledge was, did you know that the clock resets to 0? So a lot of people are thinking, well, I've had 15 days of review and then they put it on hold. When I resubmit it, will be at day 15. And no, that's not the case. When you do an RTA hold, you actually are going to have the clock reset to 0 days. So when you resubmit with your RTA response, you're going to be back at 0 days again. So you gain nothing. An AI hold is different. They keep the clock at where it is. So at this 57th or 58th or 59th or 60th day, somewhere in there, when you receive that AI hold, when they restart the clock, they restarted it wherever you were. But for the RTA holds, the reason why they put you on hold is because you didn't have a sufficient quality submission, didn't have all the things that are required in the checklist. So they're saying it wasn't ready to submit in the first place. So we're starting you back at 0. And so that's a definite thing you want to avoid in terms of timing. So submitting things that don't have what's required, you're just wasting 2 weeks. The next thing, let's see here. We actually had a question here. Cool. So it says, when does the FDA go from an RTA hold to making you submit your 510K from scratch? And that's a question that's excellent, and I've thought about that, and I don't know the answer. I haven't seen any companies that are so stubborn that they insist upon submitting garbage to the FDA multiple times. If I had an RTA hold that I responded to and I got another RTA hold back, I think that's the point at which I would call somebody for help if I didn't ask for it the first time. So to have a company go back 3 times, I have seen it in a few rare cases, but that third time through is a very minor issue, and the reviewer really shouldn't have put it on RTA hold. So I've never seen something where the company just kept on stubbornly going back and asking over and over again the same thing. They usually either withdraw their submission or they get help and they get it fixed and they get it through into substantive review. But the FDA could take the approach that they could just refuse your submission. So they do have the ability to reject your submission and say that it's not of sufficient quality, and they're not going to review it again. They've rejected pre-subs. They've given companies, they get them on the phone. They say, you need to withdraw your submission because this isn't acceptable. This isn't going to be a 510K, and most companies listen. I suppose if a company wanted to be obstinate and argue with the FDA and say, no, I want you to make a decision, they could make the NSE decision and come up with a reason. But I just don't know how many times you could go through that cycle. The fourth question I had here was, what do you do when the reviewer is wrong? So frequently we will submit something to the FDA, a 510K, and the reviewer will come back with a comment either in an AI additional information request or in an RTA, and they'll say, this thing is missing. And we are like, no, it's not. It's right there. But you got to keep in mind, these submissions, they used to be 300 pages. Now the average submission is 1,200 pages, according to the FDA. I think the average is closer to 2,000 or more. And I've submitted submissions that are over 6,000 before we even had RTA responses and AI responses, which add even more paperwork to it. And then you might have an interactive review. So by the time you're done, you could have a 10,000 page review. In 10,000 pages, it's quite possible that the FDA couldn't find what they were looking for. In theory, everybody would organize their submissions exactly the same way and you would have no trouble navigating them, but then we wouldn't need an RTA screening process. The whole reason why they have the RTA screening process is not everybody organizes it the same way. They don't have the same format, they don't have the same comment. Even amongst experienced 510K submitters, you'll have some that will do a 510K where they'll use a document structure, so everything's document 001, 002, 003, and they're just documents. Another company like ours will do volume and document. So each of the 20 sections of a 510K has its own volume folder, and within that volume, there are multiple documents. And the third strategy, which I see a lot of companies do, and expert consultants as well, they will have one big document that will be the 510K submission. It will be the bulk of the submission will be that one document. And then they'll have appendices that are additional test reports. So when you have 3 different ways that are completely valid and acceptable, and I've seen expert consultants use, and they're all different, you can imagine how it might be difficult for a reviewer to find what they're looking for, particularly given how many pages there are. And not all the reports from the test labs are all structured the same way. Some of them are written by companies, testing labs that are outside the US, and English isn't even their first language. So the organization of the submission really plays into this, how big the submission is, how stressed the reviewer is. And don't forget, not all the FDA reviewers have as much experience as our firm does. We've run across reviewers that have less than 6 months of experience. And their boss, in some cases, only has 18 months of experience, frighteningly enough. During this COVID pandemic, we actually saw a supervisor of a lead reviewer. The lead reviewer had 6 months of experience, and the supervisor had 18 months of experience. And that was really scary to have that level of skill for somebody at the FDA. Now, they asked questions, and some of them were perfectly relevant and made a lot of sense, and some of them not so much. They didn't make a lot of sense. And some of the things they asked for weren't even according to the standard that they were referencing. So we ran into some problems there. So that happens. And so what do you do when the reviewer is wrong? Well, if the issue is they couldn't find something, or you're not sure if that's what the issue was, you probably would do well to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, that is in the submission, it's located in this location, and be polite and factual and helpful about this is the section, this is the document, this is the page number. And I've even had some clients say, should we put in a screen capture? If it's not adding a lot of length to the document and you're showing a graph and they're looking for a specific graph, yeah, put the graph in there too in your response. So from this document on this page, table 1 is this, and I've inserted in here for your convenience. That's an excellent response. And just don't word it in a way that it offends somebody. They just couldn't find it. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, if you show them that and they still insist that's not what it is, and you're saying, well, but that meets the requirements, it's also possible that you think you understand what they're saying and you don't. Your language is the language of an engineer or a person that started a company, and you're developing a medical device. People at the FDA have never developed a medical device. Most of them are PhDs and master's degrees that have never worked in industry. They went right to the FDA. Or maybe they worked in a testing lab and then went to the FDA. But it's very, very rare to run across somebody from the FDA that actually has development experience of medical devices. And so therefore, you can expect that your jargon and your language might not be the same as theirs, and you might misunderstand what they were asking for. And particularly if you're not extremely experienced in all the FDA guidance documents for your type of product. So sometimes ask an expert. What are they looking for here? Am I missing something? That's one approach. Another approach would be pick up the phone. Now, keep in mind it's a pandemic and everybody's working from home, so you're going to leave a message. you should be prepared to answer and ask your question if they actually answer the phone. It does rarely happen, but some people forward their voicemail to their phone. Some people actually go into the office every once in a while. They have to, but you should be prepared to leave a message. You should be prepared to ask your question if they answer the phone, and you should follow up by email, especially if you're leaving a message. So if you talk to them, then you ask your question and then do a follow-up email to document what you said, so you have a record of what was said between the two of you. If you leave a message and then you're waiting for a response for them, don't assume that they're getting their voicemail. Maybe they're a person that doesn't like to answer their voicemail. So send them an email. And you can always find the email of any person at the FDA because they have the Health and Human Services directory, and you just search by name, or you can also search by other things, but they usually first name, last name is what you're looking for, or their department. So that's the guts of how you would respond to somebody when they're wrong. And even in the FDA's guidance document on how to respond to deficiencies in general, they say number one option is to give the FDA what they asked for. So if they ask for something, you give them exactly what they asked for. Option number two would be to explain why it doesn't apply to your product. So for instance, if you didn't submit any biocompatibility testing data, didn't submit any test reports for it, and the reason is that you use the exact same materials in the exact same type of contact and duration of contact as a previous version of your device, maybe that wasn't clear to the reviewer, so you need to provide a biocompatibility certification statement, and there's a specific wording for that you need to use. So that's something important that you should provide. And if your company has changed name or acquired a technology, it would be even more important for you to explain that this is the same as what the old version was. So that's just one example of a case where it's not relevant and you need to explain it to the FDA. It happens a lot in software where they're looking for something that is a moderate level of concern or a major level of concern device, and the company thinks it's a minor or moderate level of concern device. So they don't need as much documentation to submit. They need to explain that to the FDA why it wasn't included. And maybe the issue is you don't agree on the classification of the risk of the software or level of concern. So those are just a few examples of things. I think Matthew had left another question for me here. It says all messages are visible. Yes. Okay, so is the RTA just for 510K submissions, or is it for de novo as well? It's only for RTA. The RTA process is only for 510Ks, but it does apply to all three types of 510Ks, whether you have a traditional 510K, abbreviated 510K, or a special 510K. And it also applies to non-devices, so IVDs. IVDs also have 510K submissions, so it's refusal to accept for the 510K process. It's not refusal to accept on a de novo. They do, however, have checklists for de novos, and they do have checklists for pre-subs. So they could reject your submission, but you're not going to get an RTA checklist that's from the 510K. You're going to get a checklist that's from the pre-sub checklist, and it's going to be much shorter, and there's not 180 days to respond because you didn't pay any user fee for a pre-sub. They just reject it outright. It's not a refusal to accept. It's just, technically it's a refusal to accept, but they don't call it that. They're just refusing. And you have to resubmit if you want to, but you didn't pay anything. For the de novos, I haven't ever seen a de novo that was outright rejected. I'm sure it's happened, but I haven't seen one yet. And I think that's probably because the people that are preparing de novos really are skilled and know what they're doing. You're spending $27,000 as a small business and over $100,000 for a user fee on a standard fee for a de novo, so you probably should make sure you know what you're doing. Let's see if I got any other questions here. Okay. So is the RTA process specific to the FDA, or do authorities such as Health Canada have a similar process? So Health Canada does not have an RTA screening process as far as I am aware. I suppose because I haven't done nearly as many Health Canada submissions as I have done submissions to the FDA, it is quite possible that they do have it, and I just haven't received one. But I'm not aware of any guidance document where it's a formalized process. In general, Health Canada is much more communicates much more openly with a company, and they would either email you or pick up the phone. And the typically when you're dealing with Health Canada, they have a very small group at Health Canada's device licensing review group, and so and they're much more flexible in the format and content of it. They actually have a chart that they want you to fill in to map it to their requirements. So I suspect if you submitted it without that map, rather than refusing to accept your submission, they would just shoot you an email back that says, hey, I didn't get this mapping document. Here's the guidance. Please send it. And so that is what you typically get from Health Canada, is just an email back saying, here's what I need from you. And I suppose every one of those could be called an RTA hold, but they don't have a formal refusal to accept process like the FDA does. And for Europe, they definitely don't have an RTA screening process, because what they do for European notified bodies is they charge by the hour. So the more times you want to submit it and get charged by the hour for submitting garbage technical files, they'll be happy to take your money from you. So maybe from that perspective, RTA is a good thing. I'm not wasting my time. They're telling me this isn't even sufficient quality. I'm going to accept this. There were a couple of questions that I pulled out of emails from different people in the past that they had asked about the RTA. So the number one question I had was, and I get this all the time, even from clients of ours, they say, do we have to submit the entire submission again plus the RTA, or do we just submit the updated documents? You could submit the whole entire thing again plus the updated documents. That's not what I recommend. In general, it gets very confusing when you start taking out an old document and putting in an updated document, or taking it or just withdrawing a document from the submission. It becomes very confusing for both you and the FDA. So what we have done is our first submission is 20 volumes, and we do always volume and document structure. And then the 21st volume is RTA1, or if we get through the RTA process, it's the AI response. And so each time we have a request from the FDA, whatever the request is in our response, whether it's interactive or whether it's a formal e-copy, whatever it is, we put it in a new volume, and we volume number that the next sequential number. And that way it keeps it straight. In that, we put an updated table of contents, but we don't submit the other 20 volumes. We only submit what's in the folder. We don't actually submit the folder, because then you'd be submitting something that doesn't meet the e-copy requirements, because it would begin with volume 21 and it has to begin with volume 1. So we don't do that. We just submit the documents within that folder, but the table of contents clearly shows, and we always provide an updated table of contents showing now we've created a new volume 21, and these are the documents that were submitted. So that's how we do it. You don't have to submit the whole entire thing. Is it wrong if you do? Just make sure you do it in a way that's not confusing. So if you redline your table of contents and make it very clear, this is what we updated. This is the new version that's been provided. And if you're going to do that, that's perfectly fine. But I think personally it's less confusing to just create a new volume for the response, and whatever documents have been created, you indicate in the table of contents, in the file name, and in your response memo what that new title is, and what it's replacing. So make that very clear in your response memo. We always provide a response memo, and we go into a little bit of detail on that in the blog. But you always, every single item that the FDA asks, you provide an answer to that. And we created in table format where we have an exact copy of what the FDA says, and then right below that we have our response, and we make it in blue. FDA in black, we put in blue. You could reverse it. You could use whatever color you want. You can color code it, but color coding it and keeping it separated by rows in a table keeps it very organized. And the FDA actually prefers a tabular response because it keeps things organized. And most other regulatory bodies require that as well, or request that. Other things that I've been asked is, what are the most common reasons why people get RTAs? Well, everything on the checklist is there because those are things that are common. But the most common of that list, if you want the number one, is software. So companies can write software, no problem. But there are 5 different guidance documents specific to software documentation. So if you're going to verify and validate your documentation for software, it is quite possible that you didn't read all 5 guidance documents and comply with them 100%. And the part of the reason for that is the FDA has done 2 things that are different from the whole rest of the world. The rest of the world uses IEC 62304 is the standard, the international standard for documentation of software, the software lifecycle management process. What they've done differently is the 62304 has class A, B, and C software, A being no risk, B being moderate risk, and C being high risk. They have created at the FDA minor, moderate, and major risk software, or level of concern, they call it, LOC. And so yet another 3-letter acronym that the 3-letter acronym people like, the FDA. But that level of concern, minor, doesn't match up with A. Most of the devices I've seen are B, but the minor is not no risk, it's just extremely low risk. And because it's worded differently from the 62304 standard, it creates a problem because people are in this category of level of concern. They're required to do the documentation you would do for a moderate, that B level software, but they're only required to provide the documentation that's on the A list. And so the FDA is looking at this checklist of what's required for this level of concern. And so if they disagree on the level of concern, that's your first problem. The second biggest problem related to software is the cybersecurity guidance documents. There's actually 2 of them. The first one is the documentation that they want you to provide for risk analysis and risk controls of cybersecurity. And the second one is, what is your post-market surveillance plan for cybersecurity? So you need a post-market plan for cybersecurity, and you need a cybersecurity risk analysis and documentation. And they expect that documentation to be provided for a lot more products than companies think. They say, well, we don't have any cybersecurity risks. It's not sufficient to say NA in a lot of cases. Even if you have something hidden inside the unit that they would have to break open the unit to modify, if it's possible to modify the software, they're going to want this taken care of. If there's going to be any uploads of software ever, they want you to address cybersecurity. If you're using any off-the-shelf software, you're going to have risks of that off-the-shelf software being a risk. So there's all kinds of ways that you can have cybersecurity problems that the FDA has dreamed up, some of them likely and some of them not so likely. But you have to address them. And so they've gone further than any other organization. They've essentially adopted the TIR 57 standard for cybersecurity. So that's one place you could look, but you can read the 2 guidance documents that are free from the FDA on cybersecurity, and that will really help you. But that's probably the biggest hitter is software. If I were to hit the second biggest item for what I think RTAs are given out for, it would be companies that don't have biocompatibility test reports. The third biggest thing that I would say is inconsistency in indications. So all you have to do is change one word in your indications for use, and the FDA will say you're not consistent throughout your submission for the indication for use, and they'll give you an RTA. That's all it takes. Now, they might be kind, and they might say, I can do this as an interactive review, because that's the only thing. As long as you get it back to me by close of business today, then I can accept this submission. But if you can't get it back to me by the end of the day, then I have to issue an RTA hold. So that I've had actually that happen where it was literally a typo. So make sure you're very careful about the wording of your indication for use in Form 3881, and make sure that's copied verbatim, like copy and paste into your substantial equivalence comparison, your executive summary, in your device description, and in your 510K summary. It has to be all 4 of those documents. It has to be identical. And don't forget, it also has to be identical in your instruction for use. And that's usually the one that gets people, particularly European companies, because they want to use the wording of indications that they have in Europe. And that's not the same as the substantial equivalence predicate. So you got to make sure that you're using similar wording to your predicate. And I think I have a whole nother article about well, actually, no, it's not an article. We actually did a video. Shivani Nachani and I did a video about the differences between indications, intended use, and intended purpose. So those 3 things, and you can find that on our YouTube channel. So check that out, and you'll see the difference, and that might help you as well if this is an area that's troubling you. But copy and paste. That's what you want to do from exactly what you have in your Form 3081 in all those other 5 places. I'll read them off again. 510K summary, executive summary, substantial equivalence comparison, device description, and your instruction for use. The 4th item, I would say, on my list of things that people would get hit for being an RTA would be the device description is not detailed enough. And I say this to all our clients, and we created a template, and I will give it to you free. Just ask for it. There's a place to download it on our website. Just get our template and use it. But it's based, when you go through the template, we have sections that tell you what they want in each section, and it references the section of the RTA checklist that you should be referring to. So that's how we created it. But at the same time, we also went to what the European MDR required for documentation and a device description. So if you use that template, it should meet all your requirements for Europe and all your requirements for the FDA 510K submission. So that's everything that I had on my list that I wanted to cover today. And we're a little bit over the 30 minutes, which was sort of my target. So hopefully this format is a little better than the last 2 that I did, because honestly, I was just scared of doing YouTube Live because I was afraid I was going to screw it up. So hopefully you've enjoyed this format. And this is what you get when I run from the airport. You know, I literally my flight arrived at like 12:48 p.m. and I was on the line at 1:01. I had to run across the street and up 3 floors in the parking lot. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any comments, please leave them below on the YouTube. So this will post as a video after I'm done with the live recording. Please leave comments below. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If you didn't get to answer your question because I shifted the time a half hour, I apologize for that, but that's what I'm happy to do. And you can always schedule a meeting with us to call on our Contact Us page. We have calendar links. You can schedule a call with us. It's free for your initial call, and we'll be happy to answer your questions in that format. And if you think of a good question that we haven't thought of before, it'd be a great topic for a blog probably, or another video. So please don't hesitate to get free consulting by asking questions by email, by posting comments in the blog, asking comments on the video, and suggesting new topics for videos for what I'm going to do next week. But next week's video will be at 12:30. I'm not traveling next week, so we shouldn't have a problem. It'll be at 12:30 Eastern Time, EDT, and it will be YouTube Live again. And the topic will be the AI response. So this week was about the RTA response. Next week will be about the AI response. And we're going to be publishing a blog on Tuesday about the AI response and how it's different from an RTA response. And there are significant differences between the two, and the stakes are higher. And the reason why they're higher, it's one and you're done. You don't get a second AI response. You only get one. So you got to make it count, or you get an NSE letter and you start the whole process over again. So you really want to pay attention. If you're doing a 510K submission, you really owe it to yourself to pay attention to next week's video and read that blog about the AI. And then we'll have the live video on Friday where you can ask all your questions. So please let us know in the comments below how we did and what we need to improve. I'm just trying to follow your guidance, so tell me what you want me to cover, and we'll create a video or a blog for it. Thank you. See you live next week. Bye-bye.